In this module, I want to talk about the state of nature and its companion concept, human nature, which are key features of classical realism and classical liberalism. Are there particular features that define human nature, character traits, moral constants, or less desirable features such as a want to commit violent acts for one reason or another? Realists have certain ideas about this and are usually more pessimistic than the other monolithic school of IR thought, that is, liberalism. And what this implies is that the concept of human nature is highly contested. There is no clear and unambiguous meaning attached to it. Some IR theories assume that human beings have a natural disposition to behave and act in particular ways. Liberalists and realists agree that self-interest is what really underpins human behaviour, but the former are more optimistic about human nature, believing human beings to be essentially good and for the greatest chance of success to come from collaboration and cooperation towards mutual gains. Whereas, as I mentioned, realists are a lot more pessimistic, emphasising a propensity for violence, dishonesty, immorality, and gains usually coming at the expense of others, rather than in conjunction with them. Now, others still reject the idea of an essential human nature, arguing that all human behaviour is shaped by local and cultural factors and will therefore differ according to time and place. Now, this kind of argument has been common in cultural anthropology, which has been inclined to reject overarching ideas about humanity in favour of localised cultural explanations. We'll place that approach aside for now and explore it in more detail later in the course. But what I will say now is that you can divide these into universalist and relativist approaches. The universalists see inherent character traits that transcend geopolitical boundaries, and relativists say, well, no, there's not really such a thing as transcendent features of humanities. We have to look at particular epochs, we have to look at particular settings, particular cultures and systems of governance, which is what shapes human behaviour. Regardless of your approach, however, IR theories are based around ideas about what makes humans tick. What we must accept is that human beings are social creatures that live in groups or communities, whether small or large. People, for the most part, simply do not live as isolated individuals, having little or no contact with others. Those that do, such as hermits, are considered social pariahs, and isolation in society is reserved usually for the most violent and dangerous criminals. So when the ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle said that by nature the human person is a political animal, he meant that by nature human beings are inclined to live in communities with other humans. So Aristotle went so far as to say that those who could live without the political community were classified as either gods or beasts. Now, I've skimmed over this rather complex concept that vexes philosophers in just a few minutes. But that's because I want to move on to the specific idea of the state of nature. The scholars who have influenced IR theory as a discipline, antecedents as it were, such as Hobbes, Rousseau and Locke, conceptualized a state of nature where there was no rules, no regulations, and no authority to enforce order. It's a hypothetical state of being before forms of governance had been established. In other words, there's no sovereign power in the state of nature to keep order and maintain some kind of rule of law. So what is it that happens when human beings are thrown into a lawless society? How do they behave? Is it like William Golding's Lord of the Flies, or is it different to this? Golding doesn't paint a particularly pleasant picture of humanity and the way that it behaves. You've probably heard of the term the law of the jungle before. And is this what prevails in a state of nature, where the strong succeed over the weak? Any notion of justice or fairness is completely irrelevant. So a lion would not consider it an injustice to kill the weaker gazelle. Is this the same for humans, do you think, or in international relations for states in the way that they behave towards weaker states? The idea of the state of nature, which is a concept that describes a time before humans came into organised life, in the Western sphere is attributed to social contract theorists. And this social contract is a pact entered into amongst people to live in peace under agreed rules and under the authority of a ruler. So it's a way of overcoming the state of nature. And of course, the nature, shape and structure of that contract is dependent on what these theorists thought the state of nature would be like. According to the Blackwell Encyclopedia of Political Thought, the idea of the state of nature has been used by various theories to do a number of often contradictory things: to justify the existence of a state or to deny the necessity of the state, to contrast the happy state of civilized humans with the miserable state of savages, or to contrast the happy state of savages with the miserable condition of civilized or modern humans. So this state of nature is subjected to contrasting and conflicting interpretations, which is typical of a lot of concepts in international relations, and the social sciences more generally. Nonetheless, most that theorize about this state of nature do agree that human beings exist in a situation where they are not accountable to an authority. And this seems almost unimaginable for us, living in sophisticated and entrenched societies where norms of law, order, governance and politics have developed over a long period of time. So an important term when we're studying international relations that is influenced by this idea of the state of nature is anarchy. That is, a lack of a central political authority, or any political authority for that matter. And why did this grip international relations scholars? Well, have a think. Is there any grand authority in the international realm that has the capacity to ensure order and hold states accountable for their actions? Perhaps the closest to this is the United Nations. However, as we will learn, they do not have the authority to interfere within states due to this key principle of sovereignty, nor do they have the power to do so, even when it comes to deciding upon when a war should be conducted. Iraq was against a UN mandate. I don't want to talk too much about the United Nations in this week's modules, but we will come back to that the week after next when we're discussing liberalism with a more detailed case study on the United Nations and its capacity to regulate war and peace, amongst other issues of international significance. Now let's look briefly at the idea of sovereignty, sovereign power, sovereign authority in relation to the state of nature. Most prominent state of nature theorists argue that it is the absence of sovereign authority that leads to the depiction of a state of nature that is essentially anarchic. So this is why a social contract seeks to tame the state of nature through the use of a sovereign authority. And the logic of realists is quite simple and as follows. Without sovereignty, anarchy prevails. Where anarchy prevails, there is no order. Where there is no order, life is lived under a constant threat of chaos and violence. In short, there is no security. So that's an important backdrop to what I'll be focusing on in the next module, and that is key realist and liberalist thinkers and their thoughts on human behaviour.